Okay, so to start off Unit 2, we're going to talk about the International System of Units, um, why we have it, what they are, and the prefixes used for them. This is also known as the metric system. Okay, so some brief history on it. Back in the day, it was really hard to talk about measurements. So, for example, if they're going to talk about length, they would use the foot of the current king to talk about how big a foot was. This would be a problem, though, because everyone's king would have a different size foot. When one king dies, another one comes around, the foot changes. So it was really hard to discuss measurements that way. So in the 1960s, scientists came together and adopted one system. So this was the International Systems of Units, and these are the ones that you should know, and because they define all the other units. So when we talk about length, we're talking about meters. Mass, we measure in kilograms, or grams. Grams is really the base unit. Kilo is what we'll talk about as a prefix. Time, we measure in seconds. In science, we do. Volume is liters or milliliters. And then as a little note, 1 milliliter is the same as 1 centimeter cubed. So both of those work together. Temperature, we measure in Kelvin or Celsius. All right, so those are all some basic units. Hopefully you're familiar with the metric system at this point, and those are the ones that we're going to be using exclusively in this class. All right, we can come up with derived units by combining units due to combining measurements or, solving problems with it and everything. So if we have square meters, that's area. Cubic meters is volume. Density is kilograms per cubic meter or grams per milliliter. So it could be kilograms per liter or that. What's interesting is because of the way the conversions work, they're actually going to come up with the same values. If we want to talk about, sometimes we talk about molar mass. That should be changed. We'll get more into what that is later. That's grams per mole. So we'll talk about what a mole is in a bit, like in a couple units. If we want to talk about how much solute is in a solvent or in a solution, we're talking about the concentration. And that's moles per liter. We'll get more into that next unit. Or in a few units, I think maybe next semester. We can also talk about molar volume. And so it's mole per liter. And lastly, if we want to talk about how much energy is being consumed or used, we use the joule. All right. So we need, with our base units, which is the units that we talked about, we also put prefixes in front often. We use them so that way we can put the numbers in a more reasonable, at a more reasonable value instead of listing like a bunch of decimal places or putting a bunch of zeros following. It makes it a more reasonable way to talk about it. All right, so I like to, so here's kind of where, about here is where I consider the dividing line. So going up, we're increasing the size of it. Going down, we're talking about smaller values, kind of a little stair-step system there. In between is what I talk about being the base unit. So if we're talking about meters, we're just talking about how we change that. So let's go up. So if we have 1,000, that means kilo, or kilo means 1,000. So if I have 1,000 grams, that would mean I have 1 kilogram. Gram being our base unit. Next, we have mega. And mega means a million. So if we have 1,000,000 meters, that'd be 1 megameter. And then a billion is giga. So if we have 1,000,000,000 bytes, that'd be 1 gigabyte. All right, going up more between kilo and the base unit, there's also deca. That means 10. We have hecto. We have tera. For chemists, we just don't really deal with those values very often. I feel like the deca and deci isn't really necessary, so I often skip those. All right, so now going down from the base unit, if we're at a tenth, that's deci. So 1 decimeter, or 0.1 meters, is 1 decimeter. If we have 100th of a unit, that's a centi. So right, if we have a centigram, that's not what I want. If we have 0.01 grams, that'd be 1 centigram. If we go to the 1,000th place, that's milli. So if we have 1,000th of a meter, that's 1 millimeter. If we go to the millionth place, that's micro. And micro has a weird symbol, so hopefully I can erase that. Awesome. So if I have a microgram, so I have 1,000,000th of a gram, I have 1 microgram. And so the symbol for micro is the Greek letter mu. So I'm going to write it a little bigger here. So it looks like a weird U kind of, or like a really peaked M with like a sling at the front. So that's the Greek letter mu. That's what we use for micro because we use little m for milli, big M for mega. We use the Greek letter mu for micro. Now the last one, this is a billionth, and that's nano. So if you hear about nanoparticles, they're talking about particles that are on the scale of a billionth of a meter. So a billionth of a meter is 1 nanometer. Okay? So those are the prefixes for the metric units.